The 2024 fantasy football season is in the books. It is time to hand out rewards to the best and worst players on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and when I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can enjoy the NFL postseason with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we're through with the entire regular season, the fantasy football season. We can officially close the book to the 2024 fantasy football season. Some guys hurt us. Some guys made us very, very happy. So we're going to kind of hand out awards today, right? We're going to there's 7 different awards we're going to go through. MVP, most underrated player, biggest bust, most overrated player, best late round draft pick, best waiver wire pickup, and comeback player of the year. You and I have no idea who each other chose. We kept that secret just to, add some spice to this. So, Vinny, I want to ask you, who is your MVP of the fantasy football season?
Yeah, it's easy for me. I went with him all offseason long as the quarterback to target. And his buddy, he gets a little bit of an honorable mention here, but it's Jayden Daniels and a little bit of Terry McLaurin. I mean, he is the fantasy MVP. He was outstanding. He helped me win a lot of games this season. There's a case to be made for Josh Allen and some others, but again, you paid a high cost for Josh Allen, and he was the first quarterback taking a lot of drafts, but we had that mess of people were taking CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson or Kyler Murray. Some people were looking at Jordan Love. Some people were looking at these other guys, but Jayden Daniels was amazing. I can't just fathom how well he played in relation to what I thought he was going to do. He played better than even that, and he just compiled a lot of games. I know he missed a little bit of time in between, and he had a couple shaky games, but he was very steady. He found ways to put up numbers, and I think it also sets up for a big year in his year 2 in 2025. They could have a big playoff here. Looking at the matchups, they could get the Buccaneers and Lions, some really bad defenses. But for me, based on where you got him and given how quarterback can be something that you look upon week in and week out to kind of be that stabilizing force in your fantasy lineup. And again, I know draft status doesn't matter as much as this, but I think it does because it also allowed me to stack my teams in other places. Like every team that I had Jayden Daniels, I was stacked at wide receiver, running back, and I got him as like the 10th or 11th quarterback off the board, and I was very happy about it. So again, Jayden Daniels maybe it's different for others, but he definitely was an MVP for me and a lot of my teams. And if you listen to the show, you would have ended up with a really great fantasy quarterback all season long.
I think he's a good finalist for this MVP award. I didn't give him the award, though. I'm going to Joe Burrow instead. And It's because of his monster second half of the season. It's not like, I know people are like, well, it started so slow. I mean, he was quarterback 6, 11, 3 in weeks 2 through 5. Like he had a bad week 1, sure. But just by the time we got to later in the season, from weeks 9 through 17, he averaged 26 fantasy points per game in that span. He finished as the quarterback 1, 3, 6, 9, 5, and 1. And that was in week 17. That's all I went to here because that was the fantasy championship for most people. Finished as the quarterback 1, score in fantasy championships with 37 points. He had 10 finishes as a top 6 quarterback this season. That's 4 more than Jayden Daniels. I was going to say almost double, but 4 more because Jayden Daniels had 6. And I get Jayden Daniels went later and totally understand the cost, right? But Joe Burrow his ADP was 71 overall. I want to name all of the guys going around him. Zamir White, Najee Harris, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Keenan Allen, Jordan Love, Chris Godwin, Raheem Mostert, Javonte Williams, Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard. Like, it's not like you're missing out on anyone if you took Joe Burrow, right? So I don't really think the difference in paying for Joe Burrow versus paying for Jayden Daniels is really that different at the end of the day. So that's why Joe Burrow is my MVP.
No, that's a great pick, and that's actually the quarterback I lost to, Jayden Daniels versus Joe Burrow in the last round of the playoffs. So, again, yeah, Joe Burrow carried a lot of fantasy teams. There's no doubt about it. And again, this shows, again, you don't have to invest in Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen. You don't have to go for that buzzy second-year pick. Just go for the guy that you know has the path to something special. And the different paths were there. Joe Burrow was in a great offense, he knows. He had the receivers. Their defense stunk. They had to fire their defensive coordinator. So defense was so bad, so they had to keep throwing all season long. So that helped. And the Commanders did a different way. They had a great running game, had the offensive line. Daniel scored a lot of touchdowns. They got the ball downfield. So there's different paths to fantasy greatness, and I liked your pick as well. Now, for the most underrated player, do you want to go first on this one? I'll let you go first on this one because I had the first pick, so to speak, with the MVP.
So most underrated player is a player that balled out this season, but it's not getting really the hype they deserve. And I'm going with Rams running back Kyren Williams. He was overlooked in drafts. I know he still went early, like he went 17th overall, but that was still late for him with how great he finished in the 2023 season. And now this year, again, he was third in carries behind only Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, tied for fourth in a scrimmage touchdown among running backs behind only Jahmyr Gibbs, Derrick Henry, and James Cook. First in the NFL in percentage of team touches, first in the NFL in percentage of team rushing attempts at 70%. The next closest was Bijan Robinson at 61%. He played 82% of the snaps. Next closest was Bijan Robinson at 75%, then Saquon at 69%. So Kyren Williams was out there all the time, putting his body out there. He proved he could stay healthy, had a really, really good season, had a couple of big games, but just like he was very consistent. Not a lot of poor games out there. Almost always over 12 fantasy points, 19, 20 points. Like, it was just a lot of consistency where you could always count on him every week. So that's why he's my most underrated player of the year.
Yeah, and to me, the biggest question was staying healthy. He's a slight back. He had a lot of workload last year, but that wasn't seeming to be an issue this year. I mean, he just was on the field and a lot more durable than he was last season. So very impressive year all around. And they played a lot better defense than I expected. As the Rams defense got better, they could continue to stick with Kyren Williams in the running game. So it all worked out nicely for him. Now, I'm going with another running back. And if you look at the final numbers, I know Baker Mayfield had a big year at quarterback. I think everyone is evident or concede what he put up. But this running back might surprise you where he finished. He was the average kind of right there as an RB12. It is Chuba Hubbard. And you might not have realized just how consistent and steady he was. I know he let people down a little bit getting hurt at the end of the season, but where did you draft this guy? You drafted him really late. We didn't have high hopes for the Panthers. Again, we thought, okay, they could be a bad offense, and they were for a lot of the season. And they had a bad defense, but somehow their running back was very productive. He got a lot of touchdowns here, and I think this bodes well for next year with Bryce Young playing better when Hubbard should be fully healthy. There's not going to be a question of Jonathan Brooks anymore with the knee injury wiping him out. Miles Sanders is probably gone. And you have Hubbard signed to a contract extension because he's this good. And again, he's kind of like the Kyren Williams of the Panthers, just on delay here. Like, they weren't sure if he should be the guy. We have some other guys here. We're going to draft some people and they kind of neglect you, but in the end, you're the guy that's available. You're the guy who produces. He's a good pass catcher. He just is pretty steady for them. Again, the injury was just a little bit of an anomaly because he was there and present for most of the time. I mean, sure. I mean, I guess they finished with Raheem Blackshear and Miles Sanders, but again, the Brooks injury says that they're not going to go in a different direction than Hubbard next year. Like, he has to be the guy. And they even overlooked him on his own team by going and get a guy with a torn ACL. He tears his ACL again. Hubbard is the continued player there. So if you had Hubbard, you're mostly pleased with the results because you got an RB1 very late. And I think all the people that are still zero RB pounding the table probably going to have a big poster of Chuba Hubbard in their rooms or whatever if you help them win the championship.
I think that's a good pick, especially because we have to remember that going in the fantasy drafts next year, how underrated he was. And with Jonathan Brooks, who knows when he can come back after his second ACL tear. So great pick by you. Now, I'm really excited to get into this biggest bust because there's a lot of different candidates, right? And there's a lot of different reasons why you could choose different people. So I want to see if we ended up choosing the same player or not. And we'll get into that right after we take a quick break.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Prize Picks, and it's a great time of year to get in on Prize Picks because it's the playoffs. We have a lot of interesting action with these 6 games over 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday for the wild card round. And if you're like me, you want to make the most of these days of football action as we have only 13 games left. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games this weekend through Monday, Prize Picks is a place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy football player projections and predictions. Now, with Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less, and here we always pick more when we give our Prize Picks of the week. You can look for those playoff edition on Friday, like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, all that good stuff. And you'll get a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout, want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with more than 30 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Check it out. We've been playing for a while and telling you to play here, and we will get those picks. So stay tuned for Friday's show. We'll be talking a lot about these players as well throughout the week, guys we like that you want to look at for more. You can always go less as well, but a lot of good stuff to look at, especially at playoff time. And there's a special offer for you, Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use the promo code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you pay your first $5 lineup. That's all of you on Locked On NFL listeners through fantasy football, any show you listen to. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Download the app today and use the promo code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, time to dive in to a much tougher decision here. The biggest bust of the year. This is just someone who we drafted really high, didn't come through where they were going. So I will give you the first honors on this one as well, because, again, I have so many. I could just pick one out of a hat, and I could be really happy with that pick.
I think people would jump to, it has to be Christian McCaffrey. He was going 1-on-1, and he barely played. But I'm not going to choose that one because at least he didn't play, right? At least you weren't putting him into your lineup, and he wasn't killing you week in and week out, right? Now, Tyreek Hill was going 102 in many drafts, sometimes 101, and you just kept playing him because his name was Tyreek Hill, right? But he averaged just 10.5 fantasy points per game in half PPR. That's fewer than DK Metcalf. That's fewer than Juwan Jennings, fewer than Jacoby Myers, fewer than Josh Downs this year. Ooh. And at the end of the year, it even just kept getting worse and worse. There's some of these finishes at 87, 39, 40, 61, 31, 85. Like, he had more than 15 fantasy points in just 3 games this year, had more than 10 fantasy points in just 5 games. He played 17 games this year. So he was a massive, massive bust for taking him that high for what he's done in the past. And just a huge disappointment this year.
Yeah, one guy was going really high to me, and he just was unplayable for most of the season. And again, it didn't go quite as high, but still there was a lot of expectations with this running back. It's got to be Travis Etienne for me. Yeah, I mean, this guy just stinks. I mean, Tank Bigsby was looking a lot better by the end of the season. I think the Jaguars have already realized that. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on with their coaching staff going forward. Are they going to curry to the favor of Trevor Lawrence and keep his buddy around? Or are they going to realize, oh, he's not that good? And look, we drafted him high in a lot of leagues because of his touchdown scoring from last year. That disappeared. His durability went into the tank. They didn't really throw to him. And even when they had key injuries, right, to Christian Kirk, then later in the year, Evan Ingram, they just didn't say, hey, we got to use him more as a receiver to make up for what he can't do elsewhere. Now, I had some other guys listed, but there was just no one in terms of the draft kind of value and cost and the little return here. I mean, he was just unplayable. I mean, Tyreek Hill you played him in a few weeks and got some things out of him, but Etienne was just a thrown away pick. Like there was nothing of note. And when you played him, you just didn't have any high expectations for him. So again, Etienne is there. I mean, again, first round running backs in the NFL typically produce, but we've seen them go backwards, like a David Wilson for the Giants and all these guys that you would take early. So he's one of the biggest disappointments, not just in fantasy, but in reality as well, given his skill set coming to the league and the way he was used here in the Doug Peterson era.
I think that's very fair because he was just a complete waste of pick, which Tyreek Hill gave you some value. But I do think the one little difference here is that you were willing to sit Travis Etienne pretty quickly because he stunk that bad. So if you picked up a Chuba Hubbard or a Bucky Irving or, a Rico Dowdle or a Tyrone Tracy off the waivers, you were willing to change him out. But with Tyreek Hill, you were like, oh, even when other guys had better matchups or other guys were breaking out, you're like, I'm not going to start Jalen McMillan over Tyreek Hill. Like, I can't do that. And it's just it's too scary. So that's why I went with Tyreek, but your Travis Etienne is great. Who is your most overrated player of the year? A player that got a lot of hype this season, but really just wasn't that good?
Okay, I did talk about Breece Hall, but Breece Hall ended up scoring enough to justify his value. No, he didn't justify his, he did not justify his value. I'll say that, but at least he was playable.
A best candidate, yeah.
He was playable, but I don't think anyone was too excited once the Jets' kind of offensive dysfunction came clear. Like it's all going to stink once again for Hall and Wilson, and it's going to be pretty bad with Aaron Rodgers again. So you saw that. So I went in a different direction. I thought this player was hyped actually more than we thought. I mean, it's DK Metcalf. I mean, he just dropped off, and everyone thought, oh, this is a great offense with Ryan Grubb. He's going to look fantastic. The tempo is going to be there. He even teased us early that he might have a big year, but he ends up way down there, borderline wide receiver 3. I don't know what happened, but him and Geno Smith, I mean, he was not playable for much of the season in terms of just, hey, we plugged him in. He was always highly ranked too. He kind of was like Tyreek Hill, but Tyreek Hill at much higher cost. DK, you still expected him to be somewhat okay, but like he didn't finish where you wanted him. You wanted at least 15 to 20. He was down there like more 35 to 40 in most weeks with his scoring. And this is a player that, again, he's also overrated because you think he should be a dominant force, right? He's big, he's strong, he's fast. He has a decent veteran quarterback who can give the ball, but man, when you look at the numbers, you're always underwhelmed, I think, with DK Metcalf, because how can a guy this physically built and talented, maybe he's not, dropping the balls and not being as consistent in games and disappearing if he's not a big play threat or involved in the red zone early. So DK Metcalf is there, but Breece Hall would be an honorable mention for me, even though he finished as a mid-range RB2. It didn't feel like that, and you spent a much higher pick on him.
Yeah, I like both of those. I really like your DK Metcalf one because he did just keep, like, when you looked at the consensus rankings week after week after week, he just kept staying high. Another guy that kept staying high was Zay Flowers, and Zay Flowers got voted to the Pro Bowl, which is absolutely insane to me. The worst Pro Bowl season of life. He's not even a replacement guy either. Like, this is the original pick. Somehow he makes it over Brian Thomas Jr. I have no idea how, over many guys that deserved it. Barely gets over 1,000 yards in full 17 games played. I guess he got hurt in week 18, but still played 17 games, had 4 receiving touch or 6. I don't know, 4 or 6 receiving touchdowns. I think only 4. And he had one. So just going back to fantasy now, he had one game with 20 plus fantasy points this year. Only one game with over 10 fantasy points from week 10 on. And that was a 12-point performance. Like, these are his games from week 10 through 18. 5, 10, 8, 8, 8, 12, 4, 2. It was terrible, and he kept being ranked high, and you're playing him, and it was just, he got overhyped. He was overhyped all season long. He overhyped to make the Pro Bowl, and he'll probably be overhyped going into next year.
Yeah, I just remember watching a lot of Ravens games. I'm saying, oh, there's Rashad Bateman scoring. There's Mark Andrews scoring. There's Isaiah Likely scoring. Hey, there's Justice Hill shooting into the end zone on a short pass. Yeah, Zay Flowers, he just wasn't exciting, right? Remember we were debating him versus George Pickens. It kind of became interesting because Pickens had that hot stretch. Then he got hurt. Then Flowers was ineffective all year. Remember we were comparing these two guys, who would you rather take? And look, they had their pros and cons, but Pickens overall, I guess, was a little bit better. But when you look at it, I mean, is a passing game. I think you credit Lamar Jackson. It's not always good for fantasy that he spreads the ball around and can be effective doing that and finding different guys for touchdowns. But yeah, I wouldn't say Flowers is his go-to guy. Like everyone said, okay, he's the number one and all that. I don't think that happened. I think Andrews established himself there. Bateman and likely turned out to be pretty valuable players to complement. And then they spread the ball around too much here. So Flowers is a great pick. So those are our choices for our negative energy here with the biggest bust and most overrated player. So I'm excited to see some sleeper guys, the best late round pick, best waiver wire pick of the year, comeback player of the year. Those will be all revealed to you in our final segment.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. I use this app all the time for many, many reasons, but some of my favorite parts about using this app is that you get a panorama view of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You never are shocked when you get to your seat and something's blocking your view. You get to buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps and you're set. That's great for me because I'm highly impatient. And they have the best ticket coverage in the business in case anything goes wrong. They have event cancellation protection, 24-hour return guarantees, and even job loss assurance. You get to take the worries and the guessing work out of buying tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON, NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. I have a feeling this could be the one that we pick the same. Vinny, who is your best late round pick of the year? Let's go 10th rounder later. Reveal your pick.
Well, he's a teammate of DK Metcalf, so I want Jackson Smith and the Jigba because, again, I was taking him as a dart thrower. We weren't sure what his role was going to be with Tyler Lockett. He was ranked really low in the 30s, late 30s at wide receiver. You kind of circled back to him, and that's where I got him in a lot of drafts. And I took him, and I saw, okay, he had some upside, but I didn't have high expectations. I thought I could put him in the right matchups and go from there. And then by the end of the season, I was having a hard decision on one of my teams where I had Devontae Adams, Malik Neighbors, and Terry McLaurin. I had to figure out which to bench between these 4 guys each week, and it was a headache because all these guys were producing. Look, it's a good problem to have when you have all people producing at different times and do that. But JSN really impressed me. Just some of the games he had with those high volume where he was getting peppered with ridiculous targets from Geno Smith. And that's probably what added to DK Metcalf not coming through, is that Geno Smith and Jackson Smith and the Jigba clearly had a connection there. It's kind of interesting because you had that effect really happen where you had the Washington offense basically come with Ryan Grubb, and then you saw which was the receiver that stood out from that trio that got drafted. It was Jalen McMillan in Tampa. So that same type of role, style of receiver thrived in this offense in Seattle, and Tyler Lockett just faded out of existence. They threw the ball a lot more than we thought because of Kenneth Walker's injuries and didn't have a lot of consistency, and their defense stunk. So JSN was kind of the guy that you threw to the middle of the field, get open. He kind of reminded me of the Amon-Ra St. Brown breakout year as a rookie where they just kept peppering him targets. So I think JSN could have a much bigger year in the slot next year.
And it will be interesting to see what happens without Ryan Grubb because they did fire him. So you know, it could get risky again taking JSN, but that's a good pick. I have a better pick. It's Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, this is the guy who should have been sent to the Pro Bowl in the AFC. 4th most fantasy points this season behind Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. One of 3 wide receivers to score 100 plus fantasy points from weeks 13 through 17 behind or with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So like those are massive weeks of the season, right, for fantasy. And then when you look at the fantasy playoffs from weeks 15 through 17, he scored 20 plus points in all 3 fantasy playoff games. That's in half PPR. So not even in full PPR. And no wide receiver scored more fantasy points than Brian Thomas Jr. during the fantasy playoffs. He was a true MVP during that time. So So he was just had a fantastic rookie season. He was a great late round pick. He was going right there at the 10th round, so maybe I'm a little bit cheating, but I'm okay with that. This is my pick.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great pick. And see, Michelle, the problem is I play in leagues where people take him in the 7th round. That's a problem. Like everyone was hyped on him in my leagues. But yeah, if you were in a different type of league or he was available.
I just looked at
Yeah.
regular ADP.
Yeah.
I
So,
may
I
have been
mean, it's
cheating.
fine. No, it's fine. But yeah, there's some leagues where I think he went a lot higher and it was hyped right along with Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. But there were some leagues where he was a bit of an afterthought, not knowing what his role was going to be with the Jaguars. So that's a fair pick. I'm just nitpicking a little bit, just like my JSN pick. But another guy I'd written down was Chase Brown. He went as an afterthought in some of my leagues once Zach Moss was there. So it was like there's a bunch of guys we could have done this with late round picks. But the lesson to be learned here: do not throw away your late round picks. Every pick matters. Think about, can this person have a big season? That's how I kind of approach every draft. I'm not just looking for, is he going to be a wide receiver 3? I like swing for the fences. Could this guy be a wide receiver 1 that no one is taking? Kind of like my Terry McLaurin pick. I mean, that's what you have to do sometimes. Go after the biggest names. So, Michelle, we will now turn, and again, this could be different as well based on the depth of your league and who was all taken. But who's your waiver wire pickup of the season?
I'm going with Baker Mayfield. Now, obviously, if you're
Okay.
in a 2 quarterback or super flex, he wasn't on waivers, but in a 1 quarterback league, I'm going with Baker Mayfield. His teammate, Bucky Irving, could have been a great choice for this as well. But I went with Baker just because he was fantastic all year long. Like, really, quarterback 3 in the season behind only Lamar and Joe Burrow. And if you want to go with points per game, he's still quarterback 4 behind Lamar, Josh Allen, and Joe Burrow. So he was just so stinking good, and we did not expect that. 8 finishes as a top 5 quarterback score. That's the same as Josh Allen had this year. Jayden Daniels had 6, Hurts had 7, Lamar had 9. And again, Baker had 8, 12 finishes inside the top 10. And then when you look at the fantasy playoffs again, like the biggest weeks of the year, quarterback 5, 9, and then quarterback 2 to finish off the fantasy playoffs in the championship. Like, he won people leagues. That's just such a good pickup.
Yeah, he did win me my league. I'll say that because I had Jalen Hurts and Baker was riding the bench. He was sad all season long, but got his chance in the most important game and brought it home for me. So I do love Baker Mayfield. Now, Bo Nix, I thought about here as well, but I don't know if a lot of people were consistently playing Bo Nix outside of 2 QB and Superflex leagues. It's kind of weird. Like, Bo Nix got hot and played a lot of games, but he wasn't a guy that you just plugged and played every week the way that you could Baker every week, pretty much since early in the season. You just felt confident in playing him. So I went with his teammate. You mentioned him. It's Bucky Irving. He was a 4th-round pick, rookie, and we didn't know how it was going to play out with Rachaad White. We kind of had our doubts about Rachaad White holding up again. Irving's talent was there, but we didn't expect the 4th-round guy to lead all rookie running backs here, and that's what he did in rushing, and he was taking over some games. I know he had a few clunkers down the stretch, but when you look at him, he is finishing as a solid RB2 with a bullet here with his production. I mean, he had some massive games. And if White had been on the shelf a little bit more and Irving wasn't banged up, Irving could have had a massive year and finished in the top 10. That's how well he was running for a lot of the season. And again, credit Liam Cohen. We'll see what happens if he leaves. Again, we had Grubb and the influence on JSN. I don't think Cohen's going to be fired, but he could go get another job elsewhere. Let's hope. Really, the best case scenario, Todd Bowles retires, Liam Cohen takes over. We got Baker and Bucky rolling again with McMillan and Godwin coming back and Mike Evans. That'll be fantastic with this offense. But the Bucs offense really was one of the best surprises of the year. Not only were they explosive in the passing game and Baker could throw 40 TDs, even with Godwin going down, McMillan coming in, but Irving and White forming the combination. There were just so many more viable Bucs than we thought. Even K. Dot, when he was healthy, was pretty good. And that all goes to Liam Cohen and Bucky Irving again. Always discount where that back is going in the real draft. The opportunity, situation, talent can really change things. And we saw that with Bucky.
Yeah, he was definitely one of my considerations. He was so good, and I expect next year he's going to be drafted pretty high, right? You would expect late 2nd round, 3rd round, like you fully expect him to take over this backfield because he already has. And if he could do that for a full year, that'd be great. And he looks so awesome. Now for our last award, comeback player of the year, I don't care what anyone says. There's one answer for this. So I'm sorry, Vinny, if you didn't put it, you're not right. It's J.K. Dobbins. I mean, this guy came back from just destroying his knees. No one was giving this man a chance to play anymore. The only reason he got a job is because his former coaches were like, all right, come on, let's see what you could do. They finally signed him after being on the streets forever. He puts up 905 yards, 9 rushing touchdowns, not even in a full season. He missed a handful of games. Running back 17 in points per game. He scored 14 plus fantasy points in half PPR in 7 of 13 games played this year. Like, he was a really solid RB2 for most of this year, and everyone was throwing him away. He actually came back from something. Like, I don't want to hear about Sam Darnold, this comeback player of the year. What did he come back from? Sucking? Like, he's never been good. So you have to come back to being like J.K. Dobbins was once good. He's come back. So that's why I'm giving J.K. Dobbins the comeback player of the year.
Yeah, this is a tricky award because it does come back from adversity, but sometimes you cause the adversity for yourself by not being good. So Sam Darnold did that, but he did land in a very good situation. So I guess we'll call him a very deep cut honorable mention in the NFL definition of this award, which is ludicrous. But I will go, keep in mind, it went to Joe Flacco last year, coming back from being on his couch. So,
but Flacco was once good. So that makes sense. He once won a Super Bowl and was good for a long stretch.
His adversity was being on his couch and just needing another paycheck. But yes, I did write down J.K. Dobbins because I also love this player. I've always liked him. I thought he's explosive. And then to land here, like, this is just part of the incredible Chargers makeover. Like, all right, we're going to just go pick up the Ravens backfield that's always heard of, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, and they actually work out for this team. I know Edwards wasn't all that great, but Dobbins was spectacular in games. He took over with his explosiveness when he was healthy. Now, he did have injuries, but let's give the guy a break. This guy had injuries where he couldn't even be on the field, and he did come back in the end, and he's going to be someone that you're going to worry about in the playoffs, starting with the Texans. So he could be a guy that we want to look at for some prize picks or FanDuel this week. We'll watch out for that. But Dobbins, again, he was clearly the guy. We'll see how it plays out in the NFL awards. He'll probably go to Darnold. Probably be a bad idea because Darnold, whatever, is a bigger name. But at this point, Dobbins should be the bigger name. He's part of the Jim Harbaugh kind of revival here in Los Angeles very quickly. We shouldn't take that for granted. I think it's one of those things, storylines in the NFL. We talked about their offense and the turnaround. We just expected it was going to happen because of how good Harbaugh was, but Dobbins staying healthy was key to everything in that.
It really, really was. I'm just like so happy for J.K. Dobbins to be back and had this opportunity and balled out. So that is it for our awards. That's it for today's show. We will be back with you tomorrow. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to us on your podcast app, hit the subscribe, like, review, all that good stuff. Have a great night. Talk to you tomorrow.